Should the works of Marianne North be considered acts of resistance against Victorian gender constraints, or products of privilege and empire? For Victorian women, independence was rarely achieved without compromise. Marianne North, a Victorian botanist, artist, and traveller, is often celebrated as an intrepid woman who challenged restrictive social norms through her art, travel, and authorship. She is best known for producing an extensive collection of over 800 botanical paintings, documenting plant species from all over the world. Her career developed during a period of rapid expansion in botanical sciences. The 19th century, marking a transformative era tied to imperial exploration, saw botanists embarking on global plant hunting expeditions and establishing numerous influential research centres and gardens. However, it remained a male-dominated field, and societal attitudes towards women were largely negative. This presentation argues that Marianne North's work can be understood both as acts of resistance against Victorian gender constraints and as products of her time. I want to find out how living in a prejudiced society shaped North's opportunities and experiences. I will explore how she defied gender roles to lead an independent life outside of marriage, whilst also considering how the privileges of class and empire shaped her work and legacy. By examining her autobiography, I will gain insight into her ambitions, personality, and how she wanted to be perceived, whilst her paintings and gallery will reveal the environment she chose to work in and how she tried to communicate to the world. This presentation will demonstrate the ways that Marianne North's career reflects the complexities and contradictions of gender, social class, and colonialism in 19th century Britain. Marianne North's independence in her later adulthood was not achieved without support. She had a very privileged upbringing. Born into a wealthy landowning family, she was able to spend her early years pursuing various hobbies, including singing and painting. According to Sheffield, North spent the first half of her life firmly ensconced within the feminine world of the British upper class. It was with her family that she first travelled, taking a 3-year trip around Europe at age 16. Growing up, she was inseparable from her father, speaking of their close relationship in Recollections of a Happy Life, the autobiography edited by her sister. Towards the start of Volume 1, she says, "He was from first to last the one idol and friend of my life, and apart from him I had little pleasure and no secrets." It was his influence and social connections that played a huge role in her artistic and scientific ambitions. She began travelling alone later in her life, visiting 15 countries between 1871 and 1885. These trips are all well documented in her autobiography and in her paintings, which can be viewed at her permanent gallery in Kew Gardens. North undermined Victorian patriarchal ideas by travelling alone. Most women who were able to travel did so with their husbands, fathers, or brothers. Independent female travellers were much rarer and seen as transgressive. Following her father's death in 1869, she began her travels alone at 40 years old. She never married and in Victorian society would have been known as a spinster, a derogatory term for unmarried women over a certain age. General attitudes towards these women were very negative. They were seen as failures and outcasts, but Marianne still appeared to have little interest in becoming a wife, describing marriage as a terrible experiment. Women of this time were expected to uphold specific standards, including submissiveness and domesticity, and to fulfill their primary roles as wives and mothers. Her refusal to conform to these values demonstrates her rebellious and audacious spirit, proving that she valued independence and pursuing her own interests and ambitions over traditional roles. Her bold decisions to travel and work independently highlight her resistance to Victorian gender roles, as well as the more fortunate position afforded to her by her social status. Her indifference to becoming a wife extended to her lack of interest in becoming an assistant to a male botanist, as most women did to gain recognition in the field. The act of painting, illustrating, or collecting plants was neither uncommon nor frowned upon for 19th century women. However, they were not accepted in the sciences, including botany. Women could only operate publicly in the field so long as they made clear they were not a threat to their male counterparts, labeling themselves as hobby collectors or painters rather than scientists. So very few women pursued independent research or received credit for their work. Marianne North, however, rejected these imposed norms. She planned, funded, and carried out her own expeditions, as well as creating a vast body of work under her own name. Her artistic and scientific determination demonstrates her confidence in defying conventions. The existence of her two autobiographies are a perfect example of North controlling her own narrative. Whilst life writing was gaining popularity in this era, it was still largely the domain of male public figures, explorers, and scientists. Through self-authorship, she was able to document her life as an independent female traveller and construct her own professional identity, positioning herself within the scientific community in ways similar to those of Victorian men. The texts provide remarkable insight into her personality, as she frames her independence as entirely natural rather than radical or subversive. For example, she presents her extensive cross-cultural travels with a sense of casualness in phrases such as, "Then I went to see some of the less civilized and more interesting people." Her tone in this implies how accustomed she was to travelling in this way, but also exposes the colonial privilege she had to move across countries with such ease. Her ambitions to be part of science and discovery are also made clear by her associations with men like Joseph Dalton Hooker, Alfred Russel Wallace, and Charles Darwin, and her wishes for her gallery to be in the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, a scientific institution. Marianne North's travels began with America and Canada in 1871. She opens Chapter 2 of her recollections by introducing her plan to visit her friend Mrs. S. in the United States. Her reasoning for this plan was that average people in England have but a very confused idea of the difference between North and South America. This critique of her society positions her as intellectually superior to the average Victorian woman, and demonstrates her refusal to submit to passive gender roles. She claims she has the authority and expertise to travel. She writes this passage with confidence and humour, and without the modesty expected of women in this era. Her paintings from around this time also defy expectations for female botanical artists. For example, Leonotus nepetifolia and Dr. Hummingbirds, Jamaica, created in the second year of her travels. Typical of her work, this was painted directly from life, facing the elements, a practice that was predominantly very masculine. She worked under severe conditions, risking exposure to tropical diseases, extreme heat, and insects. This tenacious attitude is echoed in her writing, as she emphasizes diligence and productivity. She states, "It was impossible to paint fast enough, but we can all work hard at what we like best." Society in this time expected women to paint indoors from specimens, and a vast majority of botanical illustration from Victorian England follows a very particular style. The style of North's work is just as unconventional as her working methods, using bold, saturated oil paints to capture lifelike details. The compositions are dense and complex, unlike the delicate watercolours or etchings expected from the time. Her eye for detail and unusual approaches made her popular among famous artists and scientists, including Swinburne and Darwin. Coming from such a wealthy, socially prominent family gave North the freedom that other Victorian women couldn't have, as she didn't need to earn a living. Following her mother's death, she was introduced to various prominent members of Victorian society, including leading scientists. Her family's friendship with the influential Hooker family significantly shaped her opportunities. William Hooker, the first director of the Royal Botanic Gardens, famously gifted Marianne a bunch of flowering Amherstshire nobilis, the first of its kind to flower in England. This interaction sparked her fascination with botany, recalling that these flowers made her long more and more to see the tropics. Her relationship with the Hooker family also worked in her favour later in her life, helping establish her gallery. William Hooker's son, Joseph Dalton Hooker, was a close collaborator of Charles Darwin and championed the roles of both amateurs and professionals in scientific discovery. This value helped North carve out her own space within the field. This insinuates that, whilst the vast majority of her work was completely independent, she relied heavily on her connections and her family's wealth to begin her career. Writing about her travels in America and Canada, she often mentions the virgin forests. Whilst this phrase may capture an immense admiration for the wild beauty of nature, it may also suggest a level of ignorance of the indigenous presence in their own lands. The word virgin implies the forests are empty and untouched, mirroring colonial ideas. This expression reminds us that, although she defied many of the prevailing narratives of the time about women, she still operated within a colonial structure. This is reinforced by some of her paintings, where local people appear to be left out. She is framing colonized landscapes in a certain way that makes them seem available. When these paintings were brought back to England for sharing and display, they would only reinforce ordinary people's misguided perceptions of foreign countries. This striking image is a well-known painting of a carnivorous pitcher plant by Marianne North from her time in Borneo in 1876. Typical of her usual style, it uses vivid oil paints to capture the intricate details of the plant and the landscape in which it was found. This pitcher plant, along with 5 other genera and species, would later be named after her. It was called the Nepenthes northiana. The naming of plants after North recognizes her contributions to botanical discovery and immortalizes her name. This legacy proves her lasting impact on natural sciences, not just art. However, naming is an act of ownership, and Europeans naming plants from colonized lands after themselves is not neutral. Reclaiming this indigenous plant as imperial property shows a sense of superiority and serves as a reminder of Britain's colonial presence. Whether knowingly or not, this is one example of North's participation in the erasure of local knowledge and in the assertion of British power over these people and countries. Towards the end of her life, Marianne North travelled less and dedicated her time to the creation of her permanent gallery in the Royal Botanic Gardens. This gallery is another example that illustrates the tension between resisting and conforming to societal norms. At first glance, it's a significant act of resistance. As one of the few permanent galleries in Britain dedicated to a woman, it positions her as a commanding presence in the scientific and artistic worlds. The gallery was entirely funded, designed, and curated by North in a way that's utterly different to conventional galleries of the time. It's comprised of 2 rooms, and every surface in both is densely packed with paintings and decoration. The level of control she exercised in designing her gallery demonstrates her refusal to accept the role of an assistant to Joseph Hooker. But this tension becomes most visible when the gallery is considered within its institutional context of the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. Botanical collecting and illustration in this era were deeply intertwined with imperial legacies, as British scientists and artists acquired specimens from colonized regions to accumulate imperial knowledge and resources. Kew Gardens was a centre of botanical research and scientific innovation in the Victorian era, playing a crucial role in the study and classification of plant species. With this came a large part in the extraction of botanical and intellectual capital. Public perceptions of the exotic world were shaped by institutions like these. North's family connections and generational wealth gave her access to Kew and the resources necessary to realise her vision, privileges unimaginable to most women of this era. Whilst you could argue that the gallery's location in Kew Gardens positions it in an intellectually respected space, it was also undeniably a key institution of imperial science. In her design of the gallery, she made the decision to order all of her paintings geographically, reflecting Victorian structures of control and classification. The location, display, and content of the gallery historically helped shape public perceptions. Today, the gallery serves as a reminder of how Victorian science framed the exotic world as something to be collected and displayed. It appears Marianne North didn't view her practice as particularly revolutionary or political. Instead, she pursued her artistic and scientific aspirations with a confidence afforded by privilege. But no matter her intentions, she is an undeniably powerful representation of female independence. Her solo travel and botanical ambitions, alongside her self-authorship and gallery of work, show a determination to shape her own legacy, contradicting all traditional Victorian ideas of femininity. At the same time, her work participated in systems of imperial knowledge production larger than herself. Her legacy lies at the intersection of personal agency, privilege, and empire.